When it comes to approaching Latin feel and Latin music, I am a jazz musician, and the one thing that I've heard from some other jazz musicians that I respect, as well as some Latin proper musicians, is that Latin music as a whole is a lot deeper of a subject than I think a lot of musicians realize, especially jazz musicians. They assume that because they can play jazz vocabulary, that they just play it as straight eighth notes, and there you go, you have Latin music, and it's just not the case. Now, granted, there's a lot of vocabulary that is shared, but just like how there's a lot of vocabulary shared between Spanish and English, that doesn't make them the same language, and that doesn't mean you can go up to a Spanish person and speak to them in English and expect them to understand. So that being said, my approach to Latin music is more along the lines of ironing out the eighth notes, but it's more about the rhythm and the articulation, more so than just playing lines that are even. So if I'm playing Recordame, the way I'll approach it is I tend to try and think of more rhythm. Like what's going on if it's like a samba feel, a bossa feel, and how can I make it sound more independent than a swing feel, even if I'm still using the same language. I'm thinking doom da doom dum doom dum ba doom da doom da. So think about that when you're approaching Latin music. I would dedicate some time to listening to proper Latin music. Look up some musicians that are experienced in sambas and bossas and like Brazilian music, and try and immerse yourself in that if you're going to approach Latin music as a jazz musician. All right, because the true Latin musicians can always tell a jazz musician apart from a Latin musician. All right, and our goal should be we don't want to be exposed like that. So even though I'm a jazz musician, and I know I'm a jazz musician, I'm still going to dedicate time to listening to the proper music and the proper style that I'm trying to play. I'm not just going to guess. All right, so think about that, try that out, and try to experiment with these rhythms. Even if I were playing like a blues or something, if I'm playing Billy's Bells. I'm still thinking doom 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 doom. It's all about the groove. All right, that's always what I'm thinking about in while I'm improvising in this style. Is how can I capture the groove, the feel? I'm not even focused on the notes so much. Just chromatic scale, whatever you're going to do. But it's more about capturing that feel. That's something I learned in my time as a bass player. The great Victor Wooten demonstrated playing a killin' walking jazz bass line, just going up the chromatic scale, and it worked because he captured the feel perfectly. All right, so try and think about that when you approach the Latin style. How can you capture the feel? All right, and be sure to check out some proper Latin music, speak to some Latin musicians and see what they recommend, get the advice, but don't settle for being a jazz musician that's playing Latin music. All right, that's going to set you apart and it'll make you more marketable as a musician. So keep that in mind.